Well, I want to begin by welcoming everybody officially. And this is a presentation about this question. What do we really know about what our students know, think, do, and feel about climate change, sustainability, and resilience? I'd like to begin with a popcorn activity that gives you folks the experience that Matt and I had when we went around and talked with students on 8 of our UH campuses about these issues. So I'm going to popcorn to Navin and ask you to read this student's statement, and then I'll call on someone else, and this will also let me hear each of your voices. So these are quotes from the study that we collected with students. Navin.
Okay, thanks, Krista. I think the main problem is that no one cares. Like, really, it's not talked about. No one really gives a crap about that.
And Rachel, could you unmute and read this one?
Okay, let's see. I'm from rural Japan. There was a little spring. The sky was very clear, the rice field very beautiful. Nice scenery. I thought it was nice, but my grandpa and grandma told me there used to be more sound, birds and dragonflies. Today it's so silent because lots of pesticide people use for nutrition, and once the bug dies, the little animals died because no more food, and the little animals like eagles cannot eat, so they die too. The scenery I thought is nice, but actually ...
Thank you. Rebecca, you're next on my screen.
Right. Sometimes I feel like you learn something about climate change, you can't unlearn it, or the plastic bottle, you can never really enjoy it again.
And Anya.
Most of us are more concerned about passing our classes and getting a good grade rather than actually participating because we feel that can be done after I graduate. And then they get a job and they think, I can do that after I finish my job. And then they finish the job and they think, oh, I'm too tired. It's just a self-defeating cycle.
Thank you. Laurel.
We shouldn't be sitting here just kind of watching it happen because it's talked about, but not to a point where people are afraid of it like they should be. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, that's happening, but what can you do? It's not an issue that's addressed the way that it should be. It's kind of like, hey, this is still happening, but it's whatever. So I hope that people wake up and realize that we're kind of screwed.
Thank you, Laurel. And this quote actually became the title of the study. So this is the last one. Jonathan, would you read this one?
It's just like some days you see the news where it's mostly bad and it makes you worse. But other days you see someone making a small little change and you think, now I feel good. I can take over the world. I can do something. I feel just like having a little bit of hope can overpower the doubts.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. So over this 2 years that we were doing these focus groups, these student voices really informed our thinking. So what we're going to share with you today, this is just going to be Matt and I kind of talking story, giving you some of the institutional history and some of the research that we've done to understand what students know, think, feel, and do about climate change. And this study, you can now read because it was finally published just 2 weeks ago in a peer-reviewed academic journal, which takes forever to complete. It's called the Journal of Community Engaged Scholarship, and it's a special issue on knowledge, translation, and climate change education. So Matt, you have that link. Can you stick that in the chat for them? Or we'll give it to you afterwards. So you can read more about the study, but basically we started talking about this research And this pie chart that we created from about 300 emotion utterances, such as the ones you folks just read, they categorized into this pie chart that became a little bit famous because it captures what faculty are experiencing. This background climate of fear, anger, sadness, shame, that's a very interesting emotion, and of course, hope. So it's this kind of background context to everything that we're doing at the university. And so faculty on other campuses have replicated this study. Some master's students have adopted the research protocol as their master's thesis. So it's been really interesting just sharing that pie chart. And then we're going to share with you some other studies that we did and how those kind of relate to the core concepts of sustainability. These 8 core concepts are how a faculty member designates their course as having a sustainability focus. And where we've been heading is to these key competencies in sustainability. We'll talk about those. And the point is to give you a lot of information so that we can have a conversation about where do we go from here.
Remember, gang, there's going to be a pop quiz after this, so I hope you're taking notes. Okay, so the study Krista is referring to is 2 years of student focus groups that we convened, and they're basically listening sessions. So a series of open-ended questions for us to shut up and learn, essentially. And what was interesting is that there are these, towards the left-hand side of your screen, you can see these kind of archetypes that emerged. So it's a little blurry, but so I'll read it out. The first archetype, I'll just go from top to bottom. At the top, these are we termed this sustainability habitus. So this describes a student archetype where their sense of self, their sense of identity is really wrapped up in this self-perception of being perceived as a sustainability leader. So these are often the students that are leading the charge for divestment against fossil fuels campaigns, or lately it's been all about ban the straw, these types of things. This is the type of student that like would have like a recycle tattoo or something similar. And so the total number of students that sort of inhabit this archetype as their primary way of expressing themselves, the total number is lower than the other numbers of the archetypes. However, they tend to be very visible, right? They're the ones that are getting articles written about them, so on and so forth. So there's strong potential for these student archetypes, these students' activities to kind of skew our perception of what is actually happening at the campuses, just because they are so visible. There's an interesting, the cultural connections archetype, this third from the top here, is a really fascinating student archetype as well. And this kind of describes students that don't necessarily describe themselves as having any type of quote unquote sustainability expertise or knowledge, but we can tell that through their lived practices that it's just ingrained. It's a part of who they are. It's part of their culture. It's a part of how they've grown up. It's a part of their worldview. It's just how we live, right? And so these are folks who are often involved in some type of subsistence activity, fishing, diving, growing, hunting, something like that. And so they have a really close connection with Aina and with the land and the environment, but they don't necessarily self-identify as quote unquote sustainability leaders. Again, as a percentage of the total student population, these two archetypes are probably at either ends of the bell curve. They're smaller in numbers. And the larger number of students really inhabit these other two archetypes. The cognitive dissonance, the second from the top. These are students that, well, we know that something's going on, but we're just not quite sure how to respond, how it's too overwhelming. Either they are or their personal socioeconomic circumstances just don't give them options, right? It's just conversations around sustainability are really conversations of privilege, because it is only if you are afforded your basic needs that you have the bandwidth and capacity to contemplate and consider and engage with these sort of larger existential issues that are barreling down upon us. If you're worried from day to day, week to week, how you're going to keep, food in your mouth and a roof over your head, you simply don't have the capacity to be allocating towards any type of larger questions around sustainability and resilience. So that describes the cognitive dissonance. And then the one on the bottom is perhaps the most concerning archetype at all. We've termed it karmic retribution. This is almost a nihilistic sort of frame of mind to be in. And this kind of speaks to ecological grief, climate anxiety, these types of terms that have been coined and articulated in recent years to describe that the mental health issues that are intertwined with grappling with the scale and magnitude of the challenges and the ecological devastation that our planet and communities are facing. So that's a really, not to excuse the pun, but it's a really worrying sort of state of mind to be in. And between those two, that cognitive dissonance and karmic retribution, based on our experience working with students in the focus group, it's clear that most students inhabited one of those two. Sometimes students would fluctuate or maybe oscillate between cognitive dissonance and karmic retribution, which was interesting because that helped us to realize that these are not fixed states. These are sort of useful for us to describe potential states that students are in. And for the purposes of thinking about understanding where there are curricular gaps and how we might be able to design interventions to address those gaps, really, this was the articulating or describing these archetypes really helpful for faculty. As we shared with faculty during our member checks, they could start to recognize that they had students in their own classrooms that were in different places. And so then faculty could now adjust their own teaching methodology and pedagogies so that they could meet students where they're at. I think I'm supposed to go over the schema. Is that right, Krista?
Nope, you're going to give it back to me. I'm going to talk about core concepts.
Got it. Back to you then.
So the core concept, we've spent a lot of time talking about how to expand our definition of sustainability. So every time we talk about sustainability, we say that we're talking about the 4 pillars definition of sustainability, not just the environmental aspects, but economic prosperity, social justice, and cultural vibrancy. That's really important because a lot of people still act like sustainability means trees and nature only. There's a tendency to look at sustainability in sectors like, oh, sustainability, that's trees and energy, or the transportation sector, or talking about water. These sectors are all really important, but we have over time taken a totally different approach, which is really defining of how our faculty have integrated sustainability into sustainability focused courses. So instead of saying, oh, my course is about water or my course is about trees, for one, your course needs to be about at least 2 of those different pillars, right? So just a straight botany course might not necessarily be a sustainability course, which is kind of interesting if you think about it. So that's a definition that they really use at the Manoa campus for the SUST cross listing. The community colleges have kind of unpacked these core concepts a little bit further, and there are 8. So we talk a lot about how different faculty in all different kinds of courses can integrate one or more of these core concepts of sustainability into a 4 pillars definition of sustainability. It's a way of getting faculty to see connections to sustainability that they might not have originally thought about in their course. And this is a clearer picture of those archetypes that Matt was talking about. Is really important that students have multiple opportunities and courses and ways to interact with sustainability so that we can meet them where they're at. And Matt, this is you talking about the Earth Day.
Thanks. So this slide here is a snapshot from a report that UH Manoa Institutional Research Office generated. We partnered up with them in 2018 actually, and then again in 2020 to administer an online survey that kind of mimicked as best we could the protocol of the student focus group study. In that we asked a series of open-ended questions that were designed to help us gain some insights into what students know, think, do, and feel about climate change, sustainability, and resilience. And so the huge takeaway is, yes, students, 95% of students are concerned or very concerned about climate change. What's even more fascinating is you can see that in our technical schools, our trade schools, law school, College of Ed, College of Engineering, so on and so forth, School of Business, students are reporting being less concerned. Whereas if you are studying ocean and earth science and technology, you are very, very concerned. And so this is either an indicator that students are being so well equipped and feel so well equipped to navigate the challenges ahead in our professional schools that they are less concerned, or it's an indicator that they are it's not being taught explicitly, and so it's just not something that's on their radar. The study was replicated and updated in 2020, just as we were dealing with COVID, which Krista is going to talk about now.
This is when we replicated this study, and this is just at the Manoa campus. What we saw was that we have a really interesting window now. Students understood the connection between pandemic as a climate-related impact, and saw lots of connections. Basically, the coronavirus pandemic made students more interested in learning about sustainability and climate change and increased their level of concern. I'm going to go on and give you yet another window. So we talked about the Worry and Hope focus groups, the Manoa Earth Day studies. These are different methodologies to get at this question of what students know, think, feel, and do. We have also done some assessment pilots on our sustainability focused courses. So this was a project at Kapi'olani with 5 faculty teaching English, ecology, economics, Pacific Island Studies, and botany. And across these 5 different courses, we asked these research questions about what are you concerned about? What are you interested in learning about? What are ways you're engaging with this in your classes? And how do these issues influence your decisions, your life choices, your career, your major, where you want to live, all these kinds of things. So we used some different assessment tools and asked questions like this to try and understand how confident students felt that they understood climate change, and things like this. And taking the sustainability focused courses definitely increased their interest and their confidence in sustainability and in taking further sustainability courses. So this also becomes a student success issue. Matt and I have always maintained that if we make our classes relevant to the times and begin to address these issues, students will want to come to college to learn how to, be a change agent. This is a profile that reinforces what Matt was sharing about those archetypes. This is from an instrument called the SULI test, the Sustainability Literacy Test. It's an international instrument. I encourage all of you to take it. It's free. And we gave the SULI test to a bunch of students who took sustainability courses and who hadn't taken sustainability courses. And it gives you this readout. So students really do have multiple sustainability literacies. Some understand the human aspect, some understand the nature aspect, the way systems work, what individuals can do. Everybody's profile is a little bit different, which is how we know that we have significant climate literacy gaps. If we go back to the green dot on that storyboard map, and sorry, this came out blurry. We'll have to redo it. We have been trying to design a program that would ensure that students understand climate change. Like that has been really priority one. That they value Indigenous knowledge. That has also been really priority one. That they are able to utilize core concepts and key terms in sustainability. Priority one. And that they feel empowered to take action and engage to know how to do it. Matt, do you want to talk here about the schema?
Sure. So if you recall, just to the left of this image is the student archetypes, right? So meeting students where they're at. If we were to zoom in on those bubbles in this net here, you would see names and listings of actual courses that are in the UH catalog that have been designated as sustainability focused. And they have been designated as sustainability focused by a council of faculty peers. So each campus has developed a campus specific process that is aligned with the system-wide core concepts that have been developed through the conversations at each campus through their campus sustainability committees. And then each campus has a representative of their campus sustainability curriculum committee representing the campus discussion on the system-wide sustainability curriculum coordination council, which Krista chaired up until just recently. And so there is a faculty-driven process to determine whether or not a course is sustainability focused or not. And across our campuses, they use shared criteria that have been developed by faculty and that are stewarded by faculty so that courses can be designated SF or sustainability focused with some type of consistency and coherency. So you don't, for example, get a situation where just because a class is talking about trees, it's determined to be sustainability class. That would be more considered a sustainability related class. So a sustainability focused class, or excuse me, a sustainability focused course has a primary and explicit focus on one or more of the core concepts of sustainability. A sustainability related course may just have a single class where they're discussing something, a core concept or a sustainability related issue. As an example, we had a physics instructor at one of the community colleges apply to his council of peers for his physics course to become a sustainability focused course. And after robust interdisciplinary discussion and exploration of his course content, of his pedagogy, and of his focus, it was determined that his course would fall into the sustainability related category because he had basically one class during the entire semester where they explored the ethics of nuclear power in the context of sustainability. So key takeaways is that there is a consistent, coherent, system-wide framework to designate courses as being sustainability focused. And at the campus levels, there are inventories at many of the campuses of classes, or rather courses, that are determined to be sustainability related. Slightly different at Manoa with the SUST course descriptor code. However, at its core, it is aligned with the broader system-wide initiatives, and it is similarly faculty-driven and based on a shared criteria at its core.
Right. And what we've learned about what is effective in students learning about sustainability, and particularly about climate change impacts, is that, like this picture here of this student, and this is their brain, right? These courses become their brain, their neurons, their schema, which is that prior knowledge that they had, that unique profile, that archetype of where they're coming from and what they know coming in. And then the courses that they take create these different connections, and they're putting together a coherent picture of the world around them and what is happening as things are changing very rapidly. So having it distributed across many courses in the general education curriculum is what's most critical, because I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of the ways our brain does not like this information. So if you've just got one teacher in an environmental studies course, or even a required science requirement, that one teacher can get blocked out. But if you've got it distributed coherently across different classes, then the student can create their perception. I'm really concerned about some of the climate literacy gaps. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'll let you just pass your eyes over them. And this just happened to me. There's one, students just don't know. So I've just been grading papers all through spring break. And I had a student write, I'm 21 years old and I had no idea how grim this situation was. He's like, why do I not know this information? Right? So they're missing it. Not all the students, some are getting a lot, but some students are just missing it entirely. And then they slam into it when they get, they happen to take my section or Jackie Lindo's section or someone else's course. They slam into this information and they're like, why don't I know this? So there's some who just don't know it. They haven't encountered the information yet, or they've got these misperceptions about the ozone layer, misperceptions about greenhouse gases and pollution, misperceptions that, like, you know, students will write this whole paper about climate change and how terrible it is, and let's go out and clean up the beach to stop climate change. And there's this like a mismatch. So it's kind of a difficult cognitive situation. I almost ruined the slide, Matt. Matt and I, we always miss that trick, but Matt, I'll go ahead and let you try.
Sure. So the question I have for all of you, and we're gonna do like a live poll. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna invite you to unmute and chime in your answer. So when we ask students where they have learned what they know about climate change, sustainability and resilience issues, what do you think were the top sources that they cited? Where are students learning about climate change, sustainability, and resilience issues? Rebecca, what do you think?
I think personal experiences.
Wow, that did not go as I had planned. Yes, that is the #1 place.
Dang.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's interesting, when we were doing our member checks back to the campuses, when we were actively engaged in the student focus groups, oftentimes the first answer would be social media or YouTube or something similar. Or you know, friends and family type of thing, or obviously college faculty would come up a lot, not often as #1, interestingly, but in our study, college faculty were dead last in terms of where students were citing how they learned about climate change. The good news is that when they cited college faculty as being a source, they cited like a specific faculty member that had had a transformative impact on them. And we heard really heartbreaking stories from students about their lived experience and about how the beach that their family had fished at for generations was not the same in their short lifespans. It was different from, being a 20-year-old from being, 6 or 7 years old on the beach with the family. Back to you, Krista.
This is where I thought you were going to go with when you were talking about faculty that made an impact. When they talked about courses they'd had, it was always about, or often about, a specific instructor, maybe that they'd stayed with over a couple of courses or who had done field work with them. Individual instructors who really made an impression. And these instructors are throughout the disciplines. So once we get them talking about classes that they've taken, this is across the whole system. It is distributed through the disciplines. In the arts and humanities, we have really strong humanities programs, social sciences, and the natural sciences. We talked a little bit less with CTE students, that's career and technical education. So it's a little bit less present in those fields, and that would be an interesting area of study. So I always like to mention some of the research that's out there about our brains. Couple of books that I recommend. One is this one that's mentioned here about it's called The Master and His Emissary, and it's about how the left brain and the right brain are not quite what we think they are. We actually have two separate brains. One sees the big picture and one sees a holistic picture. And this has something to do with how we're going to learn about climate change. Another book that I like to recommend is called Don't Even Think About It. And this one is about how our brain likes information that agrees with what we know. So when we try to learn things that literally disrupt our understanding of how the future is going to be, our brain will refuse to remember it. It has to do with the way our brain is constructed, the way the frontal lobe manages this information. So there's a lot that we need to learn as faculty, I think, about how to address these misperceptions. Like if I tell you the hole in the ozone layer is actually getting better because of the Montreal Protocol, and that's actually a success story. If I just tell you that, but I don't first undo your misperception, I actually reinforce the misperception that our problem is that there's a hole in the ozone layer. It's really complicated. So I think we need to do a lot of professional development for our faculty around understanding cognitive bias and affirmation bias, and some of these different biases that create resistance that looks like apathy, or sometimes looks like climate denial or climate resistance. There's nobody who doesn't care about this. It just looks like it because their brain is struggling to integrate the information into their worldview. Matt, tell us about sustainability key competencies and how we've been trying to work towards these.
Sure. Sorry, I thought this was you, but I'm happy to do it. Okay, so let's start with defining competency. So one of the most eloquent descriptions of a learning competency versus a learning outcome was explained to me this way. If I know that you have learned about sailing, if you can tell me what a boat is and the different parts of it and the theory about how the boat works, but I will only know if you have a competency around how to sail if you can successfully sail from here to Hawaii Island, right? The two different things. Knowing of and knowing are two different things. Competencies is starting to get at that actual like integration and embodiment of knowing a thing. So when we're talking about sustainability education, what are the key competencies that students need to be equipped with in order to navigate the uncertain futures that are barreling down upon all of us? And so this work comes from Arnhem Week and colleagues, and has really over the past decade or so been developed into a very robust body of work and discussion that is being conducted sort of internationally. And these are the articulation of key competencies for sustainability learning. So systems thinking, the ability to think and comprehend and understand complex systems, but also to identify critical leverage points to intervene. That starts to get to strategic thinking. So the competency and ability to formulate a strategy to intervene and be able to start to implement that strategy. Values thinking, right above that, talks about the underlying ethics, right? And so we can think about, for example, what are the underlying ethics of a for-profit company that has legal responsibilities to its shareholders versus the underlying values of an Aina-based organization in Hawaii that is working to perpetuate culture and restore, repair, and regenerate Aina people and lands, right? So values-based thinking, the ability to articulate core values and utilize those as decision-making tools and filters. Futures thinking, the ability to, I kind of think of Nainoa Thompson and the way that he describes being able to picture the island over the horizon, be able to envision where you are going, even if you have not been there. To me, that's one of the best ways that I understand what futures thinking starts to look like. Because we are all passengers on this spaceship called Island Earth, and wherever we're going there together. So it would behoove us to begin to be able to cultivate this competency in thinking, describing, articulating the beautiful futures that our hearts know is possible, so that we can utilize all of these other competencies to start to call them forward. And the last competency on the bottom that I'll end on with my description goes beyond just collaboration. I mean, that's the academic parlance for it, but I found it helpful to think of this as radical collaboration, because the wicked challenges of our times, the scale and magnitude and the interconnectedness of these challenges don't care what discipline we are in or we are studying. They don't care what sector we are operating in. In fact, they demand that we figure out how to cultivate unlikely partnerships and collaborate in radical ways that we perhaps have not done so before, so that we can rise to the challenges that are presented to us. Krista, back to you.
Thanks, Matt. I just want to emphasize that this work by Arnhem Veek and many others is really about what are the skills that sustainability professionals or sustainability programs should have. And we've been looking at them as goals for everybody. Why just someone who wants to major in sustainability? Like, we really think that these are competencies that all students need, that we all need. So I encourage each of you, as you're getting to know your campus where you're assigned, every campus has institutional learning outcomes. Those are called ILOs, and or student learning outcomes. Those are called SLOs. And there's lots of campus conversation about what is it students should be learning. So look at how your campus has articulated them and notice where there's some differences between where we've been trying to head with these sustainability key competencies. And then we brought this up one more time just to see if there were any points about this that we wanted to emphasize again. Matt, anything?
Yeah, sure. I'll chime in. So what you're looking at here is literally the strategic map that was developed as we were in conversation with the campuses throughout that 2-year student focus group. We weren't only in dialogue with students, we would go back to the campuses and perform member checks with the campus communities, starting with the campus sustainability committees. And on some campuses, we even had sort of all hands on deck presentations to the entire campus, where we were just saying, hey, this is what we're hearing. We're trying to make sense of this feedback. Does this resonate with you? Does this make sense with you? Are we off point, or does this track with sort of your experiences in the classroom? That was especially useful in describing these sort of student archetypes, which helped faculty to realize that they needed support and professional development to be able to meet students where they're at. This is designed at the highest point in the ecosystem or in the curriculum watershed that we could identify in the UH ecosystem, which is at the first year. So the schema, the network of courses there, those are held together by the SF, the sustainability focused banner code, which exists as a result of the work at the campus committee level to determine those shared criteria and faculty driven processes, and are also reflected in the SUST shared criteria and faculty driven process that exists at Manoa. So faculty were able to develop a first year academic subject certificate in sustainability, which basically introduced students in their first year of college with a shared understanding around these core concepts of sustainability that they would hear from and learn about through different disciplinary perspectives. So in the first year of students' college experience, we're ensuring that they are receiving an education that is relevant and resonant to the futures that they are facing. As the beginning of our intervention to address the broader issues of sustainability, learning competencies, and what does it take for us as an education enterprise to ensure that all of our students not only understand and are introduced to what the science tells us about how climate is likely to impact their futures, but are also equipped with education experiences and connections to help empower them to navigate those futures ahead. That green dot in the right third of the diagram describes a specific intervention to address the climate literacy gap that Krista was describing earlier. And we've developed a pilot of this, which exists and is being used by a number of faculty across a handful of our campuses. It was conceived of as a ancillary or complementary course that could exist alongside our existing Gen Ed curriculum and would exist. Krista coined the term as a SMOOC, a small, massive online, open online course, and would consist of 4 key modules. The first module exists, and it's basically an online video lecture with our leading climate scientist, Chip Fletcher, that's followed by online quizzes and directions to discussion boards so students can meet with other peers who are learning about this for the first time. The second module is just a placeholder. We have not been able to garner the resources to begin the development of this module, but it would essentially be designed to introduce students to the value of indigenous ancestral knowledge systems, especially in the context of what they just learned around the scale and magnitude of the climate crisis. The third module is essentially designed to strengthen the sustainability literacy that first year academic subject certificate starts to introduce. And the fourth module is about change agency, and it's about connecting students outside of the screens in the virtual world to community and to real world practitioners and organizations who are actively working on solutions, so that students can now start to build and cultivate their in real life social networks and support networks. And again, this is all basically designed to intervene and address the gaps that were revealed in the student focus group study early in the students' college journey, so that no matter what their path, their future pathway forward was, whether it be in the arts and humanities, STEM, social sciences, sustainability as a specific discipline, or even CTE, they would at least have been introduced to establishing a literacy around climate change, sustainability, and resilience issues. So Krista, where do we go from here?
Well, I just want to first thank everybody for listening to all of this. This is, 3 years of work that Matt and I did working together in the UH System Office of Sustainability. It's a particular approach that we took called sustainability across the curriculum, integrating it in different courses. And for you to hold this on your campus and understand the coherence of the approach is really helpful. I think we're entering a really important critical time. Obviously we have a new cohort of vistas. We have this general education project going on. We have at the same time massive budget cuts and possibly a massive influx of new funding from the COVID relief and the new Biden administration. I personally am on tenterhooks, just waiting to see what is going to happen. Are we in a terrible time or are we in an awesome time? I honestly am not sure some days. But the UH system executive policy on sustainability is really what drove this work. And it is so important for faculty to be able to say, hey, I made my course sustainability focused, and I'm working toward an executive policy that helps them get their promotions and get their contract renewals. This policy drove so much of our work. These are just the 2 goals related to curriculum. So it's really important to be familiar with this policy. I've heard some talk about changing the policy, merging it with some other policies. We really need this policy. We need to update it. We need to make it stronger, if anything. It's really been helpful to drive this work. And then I think we wanted to end with this cartoon. We've been here, you're over here in this building, right? It says, be sure to wash your hands and all will be well. We are dealing with a pandemic and coming out of a pandemic, trying to come back to classes in the fall. It's been so hard on faculty, students, our campuses, and it's been a massive wave. And then there's a massive wave behind it, and there's another massive wave and another massive wave. And we need to keep our eye on all of these things. Not just what's important for fall, but what's important for the long haul. I'm gonna stop our share now and